Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm thrilled to welcome Jonah Koslofsky to the podcast today to talk about Straw Dogs, starring Dustin Hoffman and directed by Sam Peckinpah, released 50 years ago in December of 1971. How are we doing, Jonah?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here virtually and to chat with you about this movie.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. This is a huge thrill to talk about this film, which I have not seen since I was in college. I had seen this a long time ago. So the only part I remembered was the last 20 minutes. That was the part that was like, oh, that's right. I kept waiting. I'm like, don't they attack the house? Isn't that this movie? And I'm like, okay, I have seen it. I don't know. There were parts of the first hour where I was like, have I seen this movie? I thought I had seen most of the 70s films starring Dustin Hoffman. But so this is very exciting, Jonah. This is the last, we're recording this in November, it's dropping in January. This is actually the last episode about a 1971 movie.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So by the time this drops, we're going to do one more. It'll be the season finale where we discuss the Oscars and all the films that won and my favorites of the year. And then we're moving into the 1972 season. So you are my last guest for a 1971 movie after a year and more than 50 episodes. So very cool.
That's really cool. Do you mind giving a sneak peek of one of your favorites from 71? Is that something you feel okay sharing?
Oh yeah. So next week, I guess by the time this drops, so next week I'll be sharing my top 10 films of 1971. I haven't seen everything, but I've really, even some smaller films I didn't talk about on the podcast, I did watch. So I've seen most of the big stuff, even if we didn't talk about it on the podcast. So I'll reveal my top 10, and my top 5, I know for sure will have Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Heck yes.
And when I started when I started this podcast in September 2020, I said, "Ooh, I get to talk about Willy Wonka next year." That was a lot of fun. Great episode I did with Alonso Duralde. That's look back, that was in June earlier, a few months ago. Let's see. Another favorite would be The Last Picture Show. Have you seen that film?
I actually have not yet, but it's been on my list for a long time.
It is just something else. I mean, I don't know why, but there was this string of really dismal movies that I looked at for the podcast for 6 weeks straight. And then we got to French Connection and Last Picture Show. And I went, oh, okay. All is right with the world. Last Picture Show is such a beautiful film in every way, just visually, performances, the story, it just hooks you in. I would definitely recommend that one. And then the other one that'll probably be in my top 5, probably Clute from June of 71 with Jane Fonda, who won the Oscar, and Harold and Maude. Have you seen Harold and Maude?
Also not yet. Hal Ashby is a huge blind spot for me. I need to get on that.
Yeah, if there's any assignment you should have next year, just look at 6-7 films of a director. Look at Hal Ashby's work of the 70s, starting with, you can start with his first film, The Landlord, which is okay. It's not great, but sure. You look at the second film, Harold and Maude of 71, and everything he did up through being there in 1979. It's one of the most remarkable runs of a director ever in history. It's pretty amazing. So I'm excited to get to talk about more of his films in the years to come. That episode would have dropped by now. We talked about Harold and Maude, and I was just I hadn't seen that one in a long time. And I'm like, God, this is good. This is so good. Yeah. And then moving into our 72 season, last year, February, March, April was pretty quiet for 71. There was maybe one big movie. There was THX 1138 by George Lucas, but it was kind of quiet. February, March of 72 is insane. We're getting, just in a few weeks, we're getting Cabaret and we're getting The Godfather. The two big award contender movies of 72 came out in February and March.
That's huge. Yeah. Those are such influential films. Yeah.
So I don't get to relax, really. There's not there's no lull coming up here. It's going to be big films over the next few weeks, which I'm very excited about. But yeah, let's talk about Straw Dogs. This is a movie, came out at the end of the year. Sam Peckinpah is a director I have some familiarity with. I've seen 3 of his other films. We were talking just before we started recording. You have not seen any of his other movies, is that correct?
First one, yeah.
The
I'd be
first
interested.
one.
Yeah, definitely a pretty rough first watch, I would say. But I would be interested to go to check out more of his stuff. Absolutely.
Yeah, this is, I mean, he's really known for the violence, right? Like when you think about The Wild Bunch and The Getaway, some of his big films from like late 60s to the mid 70s, kind of his trademark, as we'll get into at the end, is his use of kind of brutality and violence. Sometimes in stories that are very quiet and reserved, like Straw Dogs is for a good chunk of the movie. And then he has these moments of just shocking violence and just a brutal sexual assault that's just like almost comes out of nowhere, which we'll talk about. Before we get into our movie today, I wanted to start by just asking you kind of what role his film played in your life, Jonah. Like, you have some favorites you can share with us. Kind of, what do movies mean to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Movies are everything. You know what? There's not like a day that goes by when I feel like I'm not thinking about a movie or like getting excited for one. I feel like especially even before the pandemic, but especially through the pandemic, movies have really just been something that have been like the rare source of like excitement and just this subjective space that you get to enter and be a part of and experience. And yeah, I think cinema is everything. In terms of how they've played a role in my life, I would say when I was like 10 or 11, I watched Christopher Nolan's Inception for the first time.
Okay.
And that was a really big moment for me, like just growing up, because I felt like the film was challenging me and asking me, like an 11-year-old, to pay attention to all of the complicated things that were going on in a way that I had never been asked, that a movie never asked me to do before. And at the same time, I was also just hit with such pleasure. I feel like that's a very pleasurable movie just to look at. There's things are spinning and falling and exploding but at the same time, there's a real psychology in there. And I've gone back to Inception pretty recently. I don't think it's a piece of garbage. I don't think it's a juvenile film. I think it still holds up in a lot of ways, and it's still got merit to even people who aren't 11 years old. So
it's a great movie. I'm just kind of fixating on the fact that you were 11 when you saw it. It made me feel very old. I was like, oh my gosh, how old was I when I saw that movie? Man, what a just a masterwork by Christopher Nolan. I mean, I feel like The Dark Knight really cemented him as one of our greats, and then Inception just boom 2 years after that. We were like, wow, this guy can do no wrong.
and it's funny because I just a week and a half ago I rewatched Dark Knight Rises, and it's such a step back compared to those two. Actually,
a little problematic. It's the length of that movie. It's just like it needed 20 to 30 minutes cut. Like, it just needed some trims, and that would have helped.
Absolutely. It's sort of the opposite to this movie, right? Which, if I understand correctly, was heavily edited outside of Peckinpah's control. As it was coming together. Is that right?
Are you shocked by this? I mean, think about the time that this movie came out. I mean, there are shocking, violent moments in films of 70, 71, and 72, but there's very little quite like this. Like, the last half hour of this movie is like, whoa. Like, I can't even imagine an audience walking into this, opening weekend. I mean, especially with Dustin Hoffman by 71, he's a pretty famous actor. He had been in The Graduate, he had been in Midnight Cowboy, Little Big Man, some pretty big films. So people knew him by now in 71. So to see him and the way the movie begins and where it goes, like, it just feels like this quiet drama for an hour. And you're like, oh my God. So I think, so I did some research about that. I know I got like an X rating. Like, it got some cuts, like to get to an R, they had to do a lot. I didn't see that they took it out of Peckinpah's hands. Is that what you read, that they actually took it away from him? So
yeah. And it's always, I don't know, even when you don't like a film, or even if you don't think a film is perfect, I think just just that idea of something being edited outside of, you know, a filmmaker's control, like that, that's just always heartbreaking. Like not to take it back to another DC movie, but like you know, the Snyder Cut stuff, like
right.
that was certainly taken out of his hands, you know. I don't know if I'm not actually entirely sure if I read that it was removed from his hands, but I know that the footage of the pretty graphic scenes of sexual assault.
So here it is. I just pulled it up. So the studio edited the first rape scene before releasing the film in the United States in order to get an R rating. So edited doesn't mean removed. So I'm just assuming that meant that they went in and they just made it a little bit easier to take for audiences in the United States. I'm assuming the version, I watched the version, it's on YouTube. I don't know if you watched that version. I mean, it's pretty brutal scene. I'm like, this looks like the unedited version, right? I'm not sure. It shows Criterion Collection, so I'm assuming it says here in my notes that the film was released unedited to DVD in 2002. So I believe the Criterion disc came later, so that they would have used the unedited. So I think that's the version we watched.
Yeah. And not available on streaming services anywhere else, as far as I could tell. Like it's either the, you know, YouTube rip, or you buy the Criterion and that's it. Like
I'm always amazed when it doesn't happen very much. Occasionally, some of these movies I talk about on the podcast, I come across the entirety of the movie on YouTube, and it's a really great, pristine version. Like the movie looked great. And I'm like, how is this not taken down like a day later? It said it was uploaded 6 months ago. I'm like, how does that stay on YouTube?
I have a whole pet peeve about this. I have a whole rant about this. I feel like streaming takes so much away. Like everything is moving to streaming, right? Like movie theaters aren't as big as they used to be. You know, streaming is the wave of the future. Streaming. But not everything is available on streaming, and not everything is at the level of quality that streaming promises. Especially in terms of international cinema. Like after Parasite won Best Picture, I was like, okay, great. I'm going to go back. I'm going to watch Memories of Murder, which I haven't seen before. I can't wait. You know, it's one of a Bong Joon-ho movie I haven't seen. I can't wait. Not available anywhere at the time except on YouTube in 720p, like just the worst, you know, not good quality. And it was a choice between either watching it then or waiting, you know, the year for the Criterion edition to come out. And other stuff too. Like I watched Nocturama, the Bertrand Bonello movie on Netflix. And for whatever reason, every time there were subtitles on screen, my screen would blink. Like it would physically like power down and then power back off. Sorry to get us off on this tangent, but it's like it's an important thing to talk about. We don't talk about it enough on the podcast. Yeah, I just think movies should all be available on streaming services if this is the way it's going to be. You know? What I struggle with is like even Criterion Channel, which I have and I love, like every month, like I'll put something on my watch list, like, oh, I'd like to watch that. And then I come, you know, it's November 1st and I look and it's gone. That happens all the time, whether it's Netflix or Criterion. They like movies come and go. So that's why for those of you watching, I have physical media. I'm a big believer in just buying the disc and then you have it. You can watch it whenever you want. Yeah, I'm so excited. I'm gonna get the Mulholland Drive 4K Blu-ray. Okay, here we go. Okay, so that is my second favorite film of all time. My two favorite films are Sunset Boulevard and Mulholland Drive. They complement each other very well. They sure do. I have the Blu-ray Criterion of Mulholland Drive. Do I need to upgrade to the 4K? I just don't think it's necessary. I'll push back on that. Actually, like the movie, I watched it. We did an episode. We did a 20th anniversary bonus episode for the podcast just a few months ago, and I screened it on my giant TV downstairs. It looked just spectacular. It looked beautiful. How could it possibly look better? I mean, well, with that one, I mean, because you know, I'm sure you know this, but he shot so much of that for television. You know, that was so. I just wonder if in taking it to 4K Ultra HD, if any of the the kind of crappiness of the quality that you have when it's originally shot, if that gets upscaled, or if if it is pretty much the same. I have the DVD, and it does look a little dark in places.
Oh, yeah. The DVD
you definitely tell that's on.
It would be
SD.
better than that. Oh yeah. No, but I'm just like, if I have a Blu-ray that's really good quality, do I need to upgrade to like the next? I'm like, I'm gonna wait for like 5 or 10 years where they have like the 4D where like you can like walk into the screen and like enter the world of the movie. Then I'll upgrade.
That makes sense. Skip a generation and then it'll be
like that's coming, right?
Immersive.
Like by like 2040, is that coming? Like where you can just like enter the movie or the show and you can like interact
even
with the
sooner. Yeah. Even sooner, I think.
I've always had that idea of like, I wonder if that, I mean, I don't think that's possible. Like I could see like a version of it, like a virtual thing, like where you like the characters like surround you or something. I don't think like actually interacting with them is going to be in our lifetimes, but maybe.
Never know. I was just gonna say we're kindred spirits here because Mulholland Drive is one of my all-time faves.
Cool.
Well.
Yeah,
that's right up there. I think it's just the best.
It was interesting because it came out when I was in high school, and everybody I tried to get to watch it, like my friends and family, they were like, "This is the worst movie I've ever seen." So it was hard. It was like it took me till college and later to find my people who were like, "Oh yeah, Mulholland Drive is one of the greatest movies ever." So I'm like, okay, I'm not the only one. But cool. All right, so let's get into our movie today, Straw Dogs. A little bit of a step down, I would say, from Mulholland Drive. There are some things I like.
Most movies are,
Most movies are. But we got a great lead actor here. We have a lot of interesting things to talk about. Before we get to some research I found on the film, I thought we'd start with just a very brief synopsis for our listeners who might not know what this movie's all about. So after moving to Britain to get away from all the violence in America, astrophysicist David Sumner, played by Dustin Hoffman, and his wife Amy, played by Susan George, are bullied and taken advantage of by the locals hired to do their construction on their home. It's like the second home. It's like they're working next door, like for a good hour of the movie. When David takes a stand, the problem quickly escalates into a bloody battle as the locals assault his home. And it gets, I mean, we don't have to go into every detail. It does get into like, it's not like David did something to upset them and they want to hurt him. It's like they've taken another person into their home that they're guarding, and it's that person that the locals want, because there's been this kind of almost accidental, it's been like this killing happens. That's, I mean, this guy played by David Warner is not really in his right mind, right? So there's like something going on with this guy.
They're sort of attempting to stop a lynching, I would say.
Yeah. And so something interesting about the movie, and I was trying to remember, I was like, does David do something to piss them off and they just start attacking the house? And I'm like, oh no, it's because them bringing in this other person, as we'll get into. Anything else that we feel like the listeners should know about the story before we dive into more research and trivia?
Sure. Yeah. I will say I knew that this was set in Britain from the opening scene, not because the characters were all speaking accents, but because the opening shot looks exactly like that scene in Hot Fuzz when the top of the church piece falls on the guy and crushes him. Do you know the scene I'm talking about?
Is that Hot Fuzz? Isn't that in Bruges too, or am I thinking of something else?
Oh, I'm sure. All these, just these European towns, man, like they have this picturesque quality. It's very geometrical. And I will say that this is pretty like idiosyncratic, like kind of right from the beginning. Like you're getting a lot just from of the characters' perspectives just established immediately. It's sort of unclear what the relationship these people have to each other are, in my opinion, like at the very beginning, but it sort of reveals itself in a pretty organic way. And by the 15-minute mark, okay, she's married to him, this is
I made that note too. The first note I wrote, I said, odd opening, too many characters. It reminded me of the opening 5 minutes of Sometimes a Great Notion with Paul Newman, which we talked about a few weeks ago on the podcast, where it takes like 10 minutes to just find your bearings. You're like, okay, what's the relationship here? Like, who is this guy? I really upsets me actually when I start a movie and I'm like confused. I'm like, no, like set it up in a way that's very clear. Like let us get involved in the story from scene 1, not scene 4. Like get like when movies open like Straw Dogs does, I get really pissed.
That's I mean, that's fair. I think it's funny because it drops you into this slice of life drama. You know, it drops you into this pretty like realistic, I would say, pretty naturalistic set of people and characters. Some of it's a little heightened, but on the whole, you know, it's pretty much just watching these people talk to each other, and their mannerisms and their slight, you know, social cues. What it doesn't drop you into is the horrific violence that happens later in the movie. So it brings you into some parts of itself, but it also just sort of like, you know, is for other parts. I
just felt like I'm like, the way to open this movie is like them on the plane or something, like they're traveling from the United States to this place, and it's like, why just drop us there? This movie's very slow. There's a lot of scenes of them just kind of sitting and talking. I'm like, we could have opened with a couple minutes of just like them on the plane, establish their relationship, and then them enter their new place that they're going to live, and just like it could have been done with a little bit more finesse. I don't know.
Yeah. I will say, in that very opening scene, there's one detail that I kind of kept thinking about, which is so Dustin Hoffman's character's name is David, and his wife is Amy, right? And so he's a mathematician, you know, he's a you know, a up his own butt, you know, scientist basically. And Amy is trying to explain what he does to someone else in the town. And she's starting to explain it. It seems like she's beginning to explain it, but it's just very boring. And as she's explaining it, he cuts her off and he says something like, you'll get him next time, honey, or something like that. It's just such a clear distillation of how he sees her and how little he like respects her, that in his head, what he does is so complicated that his wife can't explain it to someone else in a satisfactory way.
Doesn't he like condescends to her? He's like, good try, or something like, just, don't even bother.
just immediately. And for all the ways the movie does just drop us right in and not give us a foothold into how it's sort of being, that I thought was a really great, like just a great choice from a screenplay perspective.
To like really set up their relationship, because it's a strange relationship between David and Amy in this movie. Like there's something off about, sometimes I'm like, is this the script or is this the actors? like Dustin Hoffman and Susan George, I mean, they have a little chemistry, but I don't know if you felt this, like it never kind of meshed for me, their relationship and why they love each other.
Well, one of the problems definitely is that the movie introduces her with a shot of her chest, which is just
without
so
a bra.
Nuts. Yeah. Just
I'm like, if this doesn't tell you a man directed this, I don't know.
Well, and it gets into this very fine line that I think the movie walks, and I think that it does walk unsuccessfully, which is that it wants to show us that she is objectified by the men in the movie, but I don't think it succeeds in not objectifying her. I think it tries in some ways to preserve her agency, but I don't think it. I mean, I don't know. What do you think? Like, I don't think it succeeds.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the point of that shot of her introduction, where it is like on her chest, I think it is there to objectify her from the men who are going to do horrible things to her later. But the way it's shot, like with point of view, it wasn't super clear to me. Like, oh, this is the point of view of these guys looking at her. It wasn't. It could have been done a little bit better from Peckinpah's.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, don't open like that. So, don't have that be a character introduction, you know.
Yeah, so we'll get into more of our thoughts in the movie. I wanted to share some research I did. So that was really interesting. So Sam Peckinpah is probably most known for The Wild Bunch that came out in 1969. Big ensemble cast, very violent. You know, starting in like mid 1968, that's when the MPA rating system came in, and you could have your movie be R, you could have it be X, and you could show more. Like one of the movies to really do something with that new rating system was The Wild Bunch in 1969, which has just a ton of violence in especially the second half. And so westerns were kind of his thing. He followed it up with The Ballad of Cable Hogue, a really interesting film, which I watched like right before I started the podcast. So I never did an episode on that, but it's really good. He worked for Warner Brothers, but his connection with the company ended after the chaotic filming of Cable Hogue wrapped 19 days over schedule and $3 million over budget. $3 million over budget in like 1969, 70. That's a lot of money for that time.
Yeah, that's not the studio system working effectively, you know.
So I read it said that he didn't really have a lot of options about directing another movie. So this came up. He didn't want to travel to England to direct a movie, but this was one of the few things that I guess they offered him or that he could take. So he ended up doing it. So this would be his first, I believe, his only non-Western movie. I mean, one of the very few, if he did others. And it's the only film he shot outside of the United States. It was based on a novel called The Siege of Trencher's Farm, with Peckinpah saying, the only thing we kept from the novel was the siege itself. So I'm like, wait, what does that mean? So are David and Amy not in the novel? Like, is it just the act of the siege at the end? I don't know if he's being literal there, but I'd be curious to see at least parts of the book and like how much is different. So yeah,
I don't know.
Anything to say about, like, I'm just like, I don't know how you go that far over budget and over schedule and are allowed to make another movie. It's like, how does anyone say, oh, okay? Because I don't think Cable Hogue was a big hit or anything. It's like a quiet Western with was it Jason Robards, I think was the star of that. But it's not a movie that looks like, oh, this clearly would take, many extra weeks and money to, like, it doesn't feel that at all. So it's kind of interesting.
Well, it's funny too, because it's funny too that you say that his prior work was very Western heavy, was not, to what I can tell, contemporary, because this feels very rooted in 1971. You know, this feels like it is so determined to comment on and reflect so many social dynamics and social changes that are happening. And yeah, I can see him sitting there with like a co-writer and being like, okay, I gotta adapt this book. How do I make it interesting? What can I bring in from right now to make this interesting? But I think kind of the end result is that this feels like two different movies in one,
right,
that don't entirely fit together and that don't entirely earn the shift that happens, I would say.
Well, that's what's so interesting about Straw Dogs, is that for parts of it, it doesn't really feel like a movie Peckinpah ever would have made. There's a certain quality to his Westerns that you don't really see on display here until you get the more violent scenes later. So there is something kind of exciting about that, like a director who's kind of known for one thing and then they go do something different. I'm always for that. I love seeing a director play in a different genre. Or, I mean, to look at this film, it really doesn't feel very close to the previous two he had made before. And as you say, the other two have, I mean, Wild Bunch, because of its violence, it does have like a contemporary vibe to it, but they're Westerns, so they feel a little bit more old fashioned, especially Cable Hogue. And as you say, this is much more, feels very much of this year, 1971, which makes it kind of a cool, different, it gives it a different vibe for Peckinpah.
Cool.
All right.
Yeah.
So I have so there were other actors considered for the two leads. You ready for this?
Sure, please.
So considered for David before Dustin Hoffman was cast were Beau Bridges, Sidney Poitier, Jack Nicholson, and Donald Sutherland. I'm kind of intrigued at the idea of Jack Nicholson in this, because I can't really see him as like a nerdy mathematician, but maybe he could have pulled it off. I don't know.
Would have been a lot like the start of The Shining, right? Like, you can sort of feel something bubbling, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, because as we'll get into, the turn of David in that last half hour is really interesting. And I'm sure that's partly why Hoffman was intrigued to do this role. So I'd be curious, I guess I could see those actors having that little change at the end. But the female role is really interesting. Diana Rigg, Helen Mirren, Charlotte Rampling, and Haley Mills. Haley Mills from The Parent Trap and Pollyanna, Disney teen. Like, that would have been really weird, like for Haley Mills to have played this kind of sexualized character. That would have been strange.
What movie did they think they were making? Like, I don't know if they ever figured it out at any point, in this process.
So Hoffman disagreed with the eventual casting of Susan George. He felt his character would never marry such a Lolita-ish kind of girl. But Peckinpah insisted on George. She was relatively unknown in the United States at the time. I mean, you don't hear about that very much. Like, Hoffman was like against the casting of the actress to play his wife in the movie.
Yeah, what do you think of their relationship? Because I'll say that I think the scene pretty close to the beginning when we see them like go to bed together for the first time, and like that's pretty much the scene. We just watch them sort of get in bed together.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the best scene in the movie, in my opinion. Like that was such a peek felt like such a peek behind the curtain and such a personal look at these characters' lives, and it feels so intimate to the point that there were a bunch of times in the scene where I thought we were gonna cut to the next day or the next scene, but it doesn't. It just keeps showing us like how they are and how they are with each other. Maybe that just shows like, what I'm interested in within cinema, but like that was, I thought that was fascinating. And I found myself wanting more of that. What did you think of their relationship?
Well, as I said before, I struggled a little bit with just the chemistry between them. It would feel off at times. I think, are you talking about the scene where they get a little bit more passionate and like he takes his shirt off and they're in bed? Like, I felt like there was a connection there. So it wasn't like the whole time. It was more like after the rape scene, as we get later on in the movie, there becomes this great distance between the two of them that I feel like if they were closer in that final assault on their house, there would have been more tension. Like, if they had been a little bit like closer connected by the end, I don't know. Because there are those moments early where you can kind of see, okay, there's a little nugget here of their relationship, how they love each other. It's not all, it's not all a waste or anything, but I just felt like there was enough in the movie where they just had this distance that I don't know. It was hard.
Yeah, I think the distance between them kind of helps the film in some ways, and kind of helps clarify maybe what it's doing or what it's trying to do. Like, to me, I think we can definitely both agree that this is a movie about masculinity in a lot of ways, and it's a movie about the changing definitions and examples of masculinity. And in the same way that it drops us into the opening scene without really establishing a lot of things, I liked kind of questioning, like watching it and questioning, like, how well do these people know each other? Why are they married? How what brought them to this point where they're in this house right now, and to what extent are they in this situation because of social pressures that are outside of their control? Like, that was all fascinating to me. On the other hand, like, if Peckinpah and the filmmaker and the film as a whole was going for them to sort of have reached a stronger union, a better marriage by the end, I definitely don't think that succeeded. Like, this is clear to me that this is a horrible relationship, and whatever wokeness they have achieved by being students in the late 60s has completely failed. They're in just as toxic and just as backwards of a marriage as their parents were, and if so I just thought that was if this is a movie about that is cynical about the social changes of the 60s, then I'm kind of into it. But it's so cynical at that point that it's an even more bitter pill to swallow than it already is.
Something that I think works really well in the movie is that we don't get that reconciliation. Like, we don't get a moment at the end after all the violence of them like holding each other, and he's like, it's going to be okay, and they kiss, and you get the sense that they're going to be, just really close for the rest of their life. You don't get that sense at all. Like, he drives off with this other character. Movie doesn't even end with them together.
Yeah. And I thought that, like, it seemed really clear to me that she had so she had been with that guy Charlie. That's her ex-boyfriend.
Yeah, there's all these there's at least 3 or 4 of them that they're like, working construction on their property, and she had a relationship with one of them before, and they're kind of looking at this American David like, who is this guy? Who does he think he is? How did he come and swipe this beautiful woman? So there's a little bit of that vibe from the beginning.
And that to me sort of alluded to her agency in terms of her having come from this town with all these horrible men and all these horrible people, and kind of rejecting that, right? And choosing Dustin Hoffman's character, who's so much more of a pacifist, so much more tame, so different. This idea that he represents an alternative to the toxic masculinity that she sort of grew up around. But as the movie goes on, she kind of realizes, like, he's actually not an alternative. He's just worse. Like, he can't he can't physically protect her, like, at all, pretty much. And he wants to benefit from the gender roles that they're both occupying, where she serves him and brings him food and leaves him alone and satisfies his needs, and so he can't hold up his end of the bargain at the start of the movie at all. He can't make her feel safe. He can't help her in any way, shape, and form. So he's not an alternative. He's just worse. And then by the end of the movie, he's gone through this crazy change, and he's just as bad as them. Like, he's like, so if it's about like, actually these students who are protesting the Vietnam War are full of shit, like, that's okay. That's okay. I don't know if I agree with that, but okay. I don't know. I don't know.
The character of David is so interesting because we are so used to seeing a male protagonist as being very strong, especially if it's like about a relationship, and there are heroes. We're used to that male being very strong, and David is not super strong in this movie. Like, there are moments of just great weakness where she's like, you need to go talk to these guys. They murdered our cats. They strangled and hung our cat in, what was it, the closet?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, just go give it a day, and maybe I'll just go ask them if they know where the cat is. And he's just very weak, and that's so interesting to see that in our lead character in a movie.
He doesn't even warn her that the cat is in the closet. He knows that he watches her open the door, knowing that she's going to get scared out of her mind.
Exactly.
He can't even.
It's so weird. Like, why does he do that?
and right. And it's so cool to see Hoffman build on what he was doing in The Graduate. And
it is like The Graduate.
The passivity of Ben. What's his name in the
Ben Braddock.
Yeah, it's so interesting to see him build on that, and I think David is a really interesting character, and he's such a fully realized character in Hoffman's hands. Like I just felt like he was so fully 3-dimensional. Like, and I think that's Hoffman even more than the script. You know what I mean? So yeah, I thought that was, like, really, really valuable. Something really, really valuable.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of that was the script, if it was mostly Hoffman and working with Peckinpah, but I'm like, if they were considering Sidney Poitier can't play weak. Like, he would have been out there, like, punching these guys in the face. Like, what'd you do to my cat? So, like, in that respect, I think Dustin Hoffman was, at the end of the day, the right choice for this because of his performance in The Graduate. You can see some of those facets of him in that movie, and then 4 years later we get this performance, and he would go on to portray lots of really strong characters, still is to this day, but I love that vulnerability to him because it leaves us on edge, especially as the violence escalates. We're like, we don't feel very comfortable. We don't think that they're going to make it through. Like, we're like, they're going to go down. They're going to be taken down at the end of this movie.
Right. And yeah, it's a movie that I feel like I don't know that I can recommend, but it's really interesting to talk about.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it is one that I do want to take it apart and put it back together and dissect it. But I don't know if anybody needs to seek it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would. I mean,
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
I'll say right off
where you stand.
Kind of off the top here. I'd say this movie. I do the Roger Ebert, Gene Siskel rating. I've always liked the 4-star rating, and so I mean, I wouldn't give this movie more than 2 stars. Like I think this is like a 2-star because there's a lot of problems I had with it, but at the same time, it is interesting in a lot of ways, and I think makes for a good discussion. I don't think this movie is entirely successful, but I mean, one of the best things in it, I think, is the Dustin Hoffman performance and the way that character really changes. And that last half hour, you get to see a new side to him. And so that part of the movie is interesting. But there's a good hour of this that is a kind of a slog. It just it doesn't really go anywhere. There's not a lot of tension or energy. And you're like, where is this going?
That's so interesting to me because I feel like kind of the exact opposite. Like
really?
I want the version of this movie that's just a social realist drama of this young couple kind of isolated and trying to work out the dynamics of their relationship. Like I don't need it to turn into violence at all. Like I just want to see her get more and more disillusioned and angry with him, and I want to see him just be completely unable to fight that. You know, like that to me was what I really latched onto and what I really connected.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I could see that. I mean, I think no shade on this actress. I did think Susan George was a little flat as an actor in this movie. I think if that had been a really great dynamic actress, like maybe this movie you're suggesting would have been the right call and really do away with the violent stuff and just have it be an examination of a marriage in a new place, a place they're not familiar with. They're from, they used to live in the United States. Now they're here. And where is it? Cornwall, right?
Yeah. England is
England
wasteland.
area, England. They shot it, I guess they shot interiors at Twickenham Studios in London. I'm assuming all of that stuff at the end in the house was just like an interior that they shot like on stage, but everything outside was done in Cornwall is where they shot this.
I hear what you're saying about her.
Did you feel that at all? Like it was a little
like flat? Yes and no. I think if the movie had been more interested in her and interested in her changing, interested in her having an arc, even just interested in the ramifications of the trauma that she endures, I think that actress could have been given the space to make that a more three-dimensional character. But being next to Dustin Hoffman is not easy, like that's and he's I don't know how giving of a screen partner he is. I feel like
there's been stories.
Absolutely. And I think that
he didn't want her in the movie. He didn't want her in the movie. So there probably was that tension.
Doesn't have its act together. You know what I mean? Like it just doesn't. I just feel like they don't know what they're making. They don't know why it starts. Why it starts this one way and has to become this other thing. What's it saying? It's kind of unconsciously bumping up against all these really interesting things, but like one or two more rewrites, and you could really have something special here.
I'm watching this movie last night. I'm like, how much more interesting would this movie be? As much as I love the Hoffman performance and that arc, like if the movie were told from, for the most part, the point of view of Amy, I think the movie would be better. Dealing with the biggest question mark for me, we get this long drawn out rape scene that's really horrifying to watch. And I don't know if the movie justifies its existence. Like isn't really dealt with very much after it happens. And I'm like, why is this here? If this is the centerpiece of the film and it's handled this brutally, like, why is there really nothing done with it after that? Like the whole the violence at the end, we get a little bit of a capper where she blows away one of the guys that came in. There's a little bit of that, but I'm like, I don't feel like the sexual assault is dealt with in any sort of interesting way, or we don't get to see much from her after. Like if you're gonna have that in a movie, we need moments, we need scenes with that actress and that character to see how they're dealing with the aftermath. And the movie doesn't seem that interested in it, and that put me off a little bit.
Absolutely, I think you're exactly right, and I think that there's an extent to which in terms of, again, it not having its act together, you know, if that had been an intentional choice, that okay, we're going to show a woman who experiences this horrible trauma and then doesn't tell her husband. That is, I mean, that is one of the most terrifying things I can imagine taking place in a relationship, is
she doesn't tell him.
But it doesn't feel like the movie is that interested in the fact that she doesn't tell him. You know what I mean?
Happens, and you're like,
it just happens. What? Yeah. And again, and there is a real, I think you're again exactly right. There's a real dissonance between Hoffman and her, especially after that happens. But it doesn't feel like the movie engages with that distance at all. It just, he's just, they're just at a party. She's having a panic attack, and he's like, do you want to go or something?
Yeah.
Like it's yeah. I think they I kind of feel like the 70s in some ways, cinema can finally deal with all of these different things, all of these much more adult and mature things. But were the people making it really equipped to deal with all of these different issues and all of these different things? Like were the, yes, you can have a horrible scene of sexual violence in a movie, but are you ready to handle doing that? And are you really ready to depict that in a way that is respectful and thoughtful and in the end, like, positive?
Yeah. I mean, I think the film, that like the scene itself is not sensationalized in any way. Like it like he deals with it in a very realistic, kind of authentic way. I like the strange, like, cutting away to Hoffman, just to David just standing in that field just by himself. Like, there's some interesting things that Peckinpah is doing there, but I just felt like the scene wasn't justified. The movie needed to deal with it, and it doesn't. And I'm like, why is it here?
Yeah. I'm totally with you. I wish I had a better answer.
Because I mean, even at the end, when the house is being attacked, like, there a lot of that sequence we're only with David. Like, she's just like not a part of it. And I'm like you think there'd be like some agency where she's like, I'm gonna kick these guys' asses. Like, there's just gonna be that kind of change in her, and which would have been kind of predictable and cliche, but at least there would have been something. And we finally see her at the end with a gun, and she does something. But I'm like, come on, movie, like, let's give Amy something to do here.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I think what Peckinpah would tell you is that it's there so that there's that moment when her rapist is trying to get into the house, and she sort of she sort of decides to open the door for him. She decides to submit to his advance. But that's so, again, like, so demoralizing and so thoughtless, and I don't think representative of how people who experience that trauma,
that felt weird too,
feel.
that she's not, like, she's kind of like open to it at first, and like, but then the other guy comes in, and then the terror comes, and she's screaming, and I'm like, what? This doesn't feel authentic. I don't know.
And I'm talking about at the end when they're trying to break into the house. He's sort of Charlie, like the blonde one, is sort of looking at her, and he seems to be trying to reestablish that power dynamic. And she starts to go to the door. She starts to open it for him. But that really didn't feel like it was done in a thoughtful way, and that didn't feel like it was done in a realistic way, like, at all.
This is not a brief movie. It's 2 hours long, and I'm like, there are parts of this movie that kind of drag, and I'm like, why can't we cut 10 to 20 minutes of some of this early stuff where not a whole lot's happening, and put that running time in the second half and deal with the aftermath? I don't know. I felt like there was something missing there. Let's see, anything else, like, just in general about the movie that we liked or didn't like? Anything else that we haven't touched on yet?
Yeah,
I've got some things.
Yeah, why don't you? Yeah, you go ahead.
Oh, well, just one thing I liked, about the first half was Peckinpah does create this bit of like an unsettling tone like where even I feel like if you're not super familiar with his work, you get the sense that something bad is coming. And part of it is that opening scene, we get a brief moment of violence in the bar with that guy, which is a great little bit of foreshadowing to the violence that's going to come at the house at the end. And like there's this, like the way that these men kind of look at her and the way that they interact with the two lead characters, even if you don't know what's coming, you get the sense that, okay, this isn't going to just be like a romance.
Yeah.
There's something coming and it's going to be bad. Like you get that sense in the early, so even when the movie's slow at times, you get the sense that something is coming down the line that's going to throw these characters into something they could never imagine. I thought Peckinpah handled that aspect really well.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Yeah. Yeah. Again, I really loved that atmosphere at the beginning, and I thought it was sort of the best thing the movie had to offer in a lot of ways.
Yeah. No, I think getting to know them as a couple, in my research, it said that Peckinpah had the two actors live together for 2 weeks before they started shooting.
Whoa.
Yeah, which I'm like, I'm not sure how many screen couples have done that in like the pre-production phase. Like you need to live together. I know I've heard stories of like when there's like a group of actors that are to portray a family, like they'll spend a weekend together, like at a hotel, or like they'll just like spend time and play board games. And because you do like that does help. But what's so weird is that, okay, I don't hear that very much. This movie, where I kind of struggled a little bit with their relationship and their distance, this is the movie where the two actors were together all the time for 2 weeks before. That's weird because it doesn't feel like that in this one. So I'm like, okay. So maybe they just weren't, maybe they were cheating. Maybe they were apart the whole time. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's true. You really don't get the sense that they know each other's mannerisms and styles and ways of being. It feels like the opposite. It feels like they're just getting used to living with each other, and they're just getting used to like kind of being around each other 24/7, which is what a married couple kind of has to do.
So a couple things early on in the movie. Did you notice that you could see the camera clearly in the reflection on the car window at the very beginning when they're driving? And like he gets out of the car, he gets out of the car. It's 2 shots in a row. Shot, you see like cameraman, camera, cuts to the other side of the car, cameraman. I mean, it was like so obvious. I'm like, if this were projected on a screen, I don't know how you could miss it.
Weird. Yeah,
I
didn't see it, but that's
like usually you have to go on IMDb and look under goofs and crew or camera equipment visible, and then you go back to your favorite movies and you can see like 7 cameras in the movie. This one was pretty obvious. This was confusing to me. So this movie got 1 Academy Award nomination. You know what it was for?
What?
Musical score. And this movie is, so much of this movie, and something I liked about it was it plays in restraint and silence a lot. And when I looked this up today, I was like, I don't even remember a score. Do you?
I do remember.
Was there a score?
I remember the score being actively bad, is what I remember.
I'm of all, for this movie to have gotten 1 Oscar nomination, if you would just quiz me on what it might have been, I think score would have been very near the bottom of what I would have guessed.
Yeah, there's moments in the first hour where the score comes in and it's really upbeat and happy.
Okay, yeah.
And it just feels like it's shattering that atmosphere we were talking about earlier. It's so in opposition to what after the cat scene where they find the cat in the closet. There's a shot of the men working outside, and it's a very like ding 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 like score. Like it's a very upbeat,
like it's a bouncy, fun movie.
And it's like, oh haha, they killed these guys outside killed their cat. That's absolutely ridiculous. I don't know how you can
like
make that
I would have guessed editing, maybe script. I mean, it's when movies come out in December, sometimes even when they're not super well received, like this one was kind of mixed by critics and stuff, they can squeak in there with a couple of nominations. I'm like, that's really interesting to me. Who was like the score? of Straw Dogs should be on the list.
There are a lot of mysteries of 1971, and I guess this is one of them, you know?
Oh, something else I said, I don't think we haven't touched on it that much. I mean, we talked about the arc of David. Like, thinking of Dustin Hoffman's 50 plus year career in film, he really hasn't done much in terms of like action, violence, suspense, thriller. Like, to see him at the forefront of the last half hour of the movie, I'm always intrigued by an actor. We really know them as being like in comedy or in drama. And then they do like, just in their long career, there's like one or two titles that are like in a different genre or something we don't see them in very much. And like, you don't see Dustin Hoffman in the middle of a scene of tension and suspense very much. So that's kind of a thrill too in the last half hour, to see an actor we're not used to seeing in a genre like this take on that, like, you know, terrifying of a situation in a movie. I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, God, can you imagine if he pulled like a Liam Neeson and decided like today that he wanted that he wanted to make like 4 Taken sequels or something.
I believe he is 84 years old, so I think he's missed the boat on that.
Now's the time. No time like the present.
Yeah, like Betty. So this is airing in January. Betty White will be 100 just around today. So maybe it's time for Betty White at 100 to do the
Liam Neeson do thing. It together. Yeah.
Yeah, Betty and Dustin. Yeah, make it happen.
I'd pay I'd buy the ticket.
So yeah, I like that aspect too. So like, I mean, when I think back on this movie 6 months from now, it's going to be the last half hour that I think about. But you would have been fine with that whole ending, the third act being eliminated, and have it just be focusing on the relationship between the two leads.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what I'll.
You didn't like when the guy shot himself in the foot? I mean, come on, that was good.
I'm sure. I'm sure that in the early 70s, this level of action felt really visceral and exciting and cool. But I think that it's just been iterated on and built on.
We've seen so much since.
Yeah, and I think there are better home invasion movies. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. and there are movies that do the nightmare of having your home being invaded in a way that feels more visceral and frightening to me.
That's interesting.
What I don't know is, I don't know how many movies do this exact dynamic between these characters in the way that this one does. You know what I mean? Like and I'm sure we'll talk about it, but like you can see the beats of this in Home Alone, like so clearly.
Yeah.
Like
quick story. You want to hear some really crazy? So I have a creative writing club, and we do a mix of fiction, poetry, and film. And we are like, it was our turn yesterday to do film, and everyone wanted to watch a Christmas movie, so we watched Home Alone. Literally watched Home Alone, and within an hour and a half later, I was watching Straw Dogs, and I'm like, wait, this is like the X-rated version of Home Alone.
literally, you know? It's a lot of tension, it's a lot of buildup. It's someone who you don't expect will be able to defend their house from a group of intruders, and then they do. You know, it's
it's like, oh, this is like the adult version of Home Alone. And I believe the production designer of Home Alone said in an interview, there's a quote, I think I read it online, where he said, like, this is the kids' version of Straw Dogs. Like in 1990s.
That is hilarious. Yeah, and again, like, to compare it to Home Alone, I think Home Alone does such a better job, frankly, of setting up all the different ways that the unlikely characters are going to defend their home. You know what I mean? Like that kid, Macaulay Culkin, like, we get to see him. I think that's where so much of the pleasure of that movie comes from. It's like, oh, look at all these weird traps that he's building that a kid would be able to build. Whereas this is just like, Dustin Hoffman's like, oh, I need a wire, like that'll, bar the door. Oh, there's a trap that we happen to put up on the wall. Like, that felt so obvious to me that was going to come back around. I wish that there'd been a little bit more, to set up kind of the home invasion.
Yeah, the way Nancy sets up the traps in Nightmare on Elm Street 1984. Before Home Alone, we get a little bit of that in Nightmare on Elm Street, where she's like setting up the traps to get Freddy Krueger.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it had been like, if David turned to Amy, was like, okay, they're coming in. We need to booby trap our home, and then cut to montage music as the two of them are like setting up all the booby traps. I don't think that would have felt right. I feel like in Straw Dogs, it's more of like more realistic of like, okay, we have very little at our disposal here. How are we going to survive this? Like, I feel like I like that. I think it would have been too much to have had them say like, okay, let's go up to the attic and get all of our booby traps.
Wait, I hear that 100%. However, I will say that the idea that the end of this movie is realistic is pretty hard to
yeah, I mean, it's
pretty hard to buy. Like, I mean, just in terms of the way it's shot with all these crazy angles and stuff, like I like all that stuff, but it feels like such a swerve into genre. You know what I mean? And the beginning is such almost a rejection of genre.
Right.
You know, they just didn't have their shit together. Like, I don't know how else to put it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, Peckinpah goes more handheld. The movie's faster cut. I feel like he could have stylized it even more in a negative way. I mean, I like that. I felt like it, for the most part, for me, it felt pretty realistic. I mean, I think him shooting himself in the foot, maybe it was a bit much. But is that a moment we would have liked in Home Alone of like Joe Pesci like shooting his foot and you see the blood? I don't think the movie would have been as big of a commercial hit.
Probably not. Probably
one of the greatest things in Home Alone, like watching the movie again. I'm in my mid-30s. Like watching the movie again, I'm like, you know what I love the most? One is every moment with John Candy, because he's clearly just making up the dialogue. Like everything John Candy says in Home Alone is clearly not in the script. And I'm like, they let him spend 2.5 minutes talking about his polka group that has nothing to do with anything. And I'm like, you like today, there's no way they'd let the actor just riff like that.
No, definitely.
And the other thing, like as you get older, it's like the other funny thing in Home Alone is, how do we get Joe Pesci from not saying the F word?
Right.
When he's like, and it's like, I mean, like this is like what, 2 months after Goodfellas came out, also the same year, 1990. And I'm just like imagining Chris Columbus, the director on the set of Home Alone, like, sorry, Joe, you can't say that. Say like you got like, say it. And Joe's like, what do I do? And just that's my other, like, on the recent watch, John Candy and Joe Pesci not swearing were the two best parts.
That's awesome. I gotta rewatch Home Alone, clearly.
Yeah, Home Alone. Oh my gosh. Home Alone is a movie that never gets old. I could watch Home Alone another 20 times in my life. I don't know if I'll ever watch Straw Dogs again.
I think I'm with you. 100%.
Let's see. Anything else that I did not touch on? I mean, something I liked is it called to mind a lot of great films that I enjoy, like Assault on Precinct 13 by John Carpenter. That idea of like, we're stuck in this building and it's being attacked. How do we defend ourselves? Night of the Living Dead, which came out in 1968, so 3 years before this, also a movie of people in a house and it's being attacked, and how do we survive the night? I liked some of the. I feel like those movies are a little cleaner, like the motivations are cleaner. Yep. They're like Straw Dogs. It just gets, it's like too many like plot developments. I'm like, I don't think we need all of this plot. Like, I think we could kind of like simplify some of this in the second half. I don't know. Absolutely. With everything with the character, the guy, what's his name, not Niles, Niles, that they bring to their house, and what he did to that woman, and why they're trying to retrieve Niles to lynch him, and at one point Amy says to David, like, just let Niles go and we're gonna be fine, and David says they're gonna kill him if I can't let that happen. So I mean, I like that side of David, like, I'm not gonna let this happen, but part of me is like, if your life is being threatened, I don't know.
Yeah,
that's quite a stand to take.
It seems like he had some sort of disability, some sort of neurodivergence. Was that your read on it as well? That was sort of my my but again, okay, yes, it's 1971. You can have a movie with a character who has special needs
Mhm.
in it. Great. Now, what are you going to do with him? Absolutely nothing. Like
He's just like laying on the ground. He's just like chilling for that last half
just
hour.
completely failed to conceptualize him as a human being. Like,
Yeah. And now this was really weird. So I'm watching this movie. I'm like, that's David Warner. That's the actor in The Omen and in Titanic. And so I go on IMDb and I'm like, wait, so what's the guy's name again? Miles Niles, just to like double check. And David Warner is not listed on the Straw Dogs IMDb. I'm like, that's not David Warner. I am like losing my mind. That's not him. And then I Google it and it is him, but he's uncredited in the movie because right before filming began, he broke his leg. And so because he was uninsurable, he is uncredited in Straw Dogs. Isn't that weird?
Whoa.
He plays like a major character in the movie and he's not in the credits.
Man, everything you're saying is just convincing me again. This is a pretty scattershot production. You know what I mean?
Like, okay, that's okay. He can be uninsurable. Why does that mean he doesn't get credit? That's very strange.
Absolutely.
So I'm like, this is like David Warner's been, I mean, how many countless movies he's been in? I mean, this is probably one of the more famous movies he's in his long career, and he's not even on the IMDb page. That's very, very weird.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't get a whole lot to do, which is disappointing, but
50 years has passed, they can credit him. You know what I mean? Like there's got to be some
sort of
insurable statute of limitations or something like that.
Yeah. At the 50-year mark, film at 50. Let's put David Warner's name in the movie. Come on, people. But let's see. So the movie made a profit. I was actually kind of surprised to see that. I assumed this movie would have just come and gone. I can't imagine that a whole lot of people were flocking to this one, especially in December of 71. There's so many movies. I mean, it's like from November to January in my podcast, like all we're talking about is December movies for the most part. It's like 10, 11 movies that all came out in this one month. And we got Harold and Maude and Clockwork Orange and Dirty Harry and Diamonds Are Forever, Bedknobs and Broomsticks, just all these huge movies. I'm like, you think Straw Dogs would have kind of just, entered a couple screens and then gone its way. So the fact that the movie made a profit, it was kind of surprising to me. But hey, good for Straw Dog.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good for Sam Peckinpah. Probably helped his career. He would direct the Getaway in 74, which was another big movie with Steve McQueen coming up here. Let's see. As I said, the film received mixed reviews. Roger Ebert gave it 2 out of 4 stars. He called it a major disappointment. Vincent Canby in the New York Times called it a special disappointment. I don't know what he meant by special. But Gene Siskel liked it. He gave it 3 stars. A couple other critics gave it 3 to 4 stars. One critic said, this is probably Peckinpah's best movie. So there were critics who really enjoyed it. And I'm trying to I don't know if you read about, I get the sense that more people like this movie now than don't like it. Or what do we think? Do you think most people are dismissive of it now? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the 70s psychological thriller genre is like pretty awesome. You know what I mean? Like the the paranoia, and that sort of stuff. But I really can't see why you would watch this over like The Conversation, at any
much
point
better
in your life, if you're deciding between two, paranoid thrillers. Yeah, I mean, I think I get it's just really not there, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, we touched on the final scene. I like the last line. It's Niles, right, who says, "I don't know my way home." And then David says, "That's okay. I don't either." I thought that was a nice final line. Like the end of the movie, I thought it ends at the right place. Did we agree with
that? I just wish that we saw more from Amy. I just wish that I wish that we got to see how him doing all of this stuff, including like slapping her in the face multiple times,
Mm-hmm.
like changed her perception of him.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like that feels like a real missed opportunity. Again, does she see him at the end as just like these horrible men that she rejected at one point, or does she like him more? Does she wish he was more of his timid self from before, or is she glad that he's found a backbone? Is she gonna ever tell him about the trauma that she experienced that's separate from the trauma that they experienced together? All of these things just feel really important, you know what I mean? And all of these things just feel so necessary to me. And they just end it in the movie, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point, because she has been attacked by these other men, and here she is married to this guy who's very weak and is afraid to go even say something. And then by the end, he is kind of in a way turned into a version of those guys, the way he's had to get back at them. And we're left with a different David in the last scene. But you're right, we're not, like, Amy doesn't really deal with that in any way. Like, we can kind of read into it in the movie, but like, it's not dealt with in any way in the last 5 minutes.
And the movie asked us to care about the dynamics of their relationship for the entire first hour. Right. You know what I mean? Like that was what we were being asked as audience members. But then at the end, no, it doesn't matter what you think about their relationship. It doesn't matter. Her perspective doesn't matter. It's just that he's lost himself. Yeah. Which is true, right? And he's the most fully realized thing in the film. But I don't know. I think should have made her more of a character. Yeah. I mean, the movie's a mixed bag for me. I think if you're a Dustin Hoffman completist, I think you have to look at it. He's the lead, and it is kind of a different film for him, you know, even of like the 70s. But my last question about the movie for you, Jonah, I ask of each guest, is if they were to make this movie 50 years later, if they took the story of Straw Dogs and made this movie in 2021, how would it be similar? How would it be different? Like, what do you think the movie would look like today? Yeah, and so right after I finished the movie, I watched the trailer for that. And it looked like just like a total piece of shit. Like, I don't know how else to put it. Like, yeah, I wasn't interested at the time in seeing it. But it looked kind of enjoyable. Like it seemed like so like in a bad way. Like kind of a so bad it's good thing. Yeah, like it just seemed like so fully embracing the genre elements, not asking us all to really see these people as people, not asking us at all to invest in their relationship. I don't know. Maybe James Marsden and Kate Boswell have a rich, real relationship in the 2011 remake that totally flopped in theaters and was released in September and nobody said was any good. Maybe I'm totally off base here, but like I think if you were to remake this movie today, you have to take it in either the genre-y direction and just embrace that it's a home invasion movie, and it's, you know, it's about the violence, and it's about the all that, you know, all that stuff. Or you take it in the exact opposite direction and you just, you know, you spotlight her, you know, you bring her to the forefront of this story, and honestly, I would watch either of those movies. Having seen this one now, I'd be interested in kind of either of those takes on it. But I'm hopeful that the 2011 version deals with the Amy character in a much more like three-dimensional way. I mean, I think getting Kate Bosworth, pretty well-known actress, I don't think she would have signed on for that remake if they didn't deal with the character, you know, if they didn't flesh out that character in a better way. Because I think if there's one thing you can prove on from the movie, like the big thing would be to make that character more three-dimensional. So I'm hopeful that's at least the case. But I don't think the movie got very good reviews in 2011. So maybe they just kept closely to the 71 script. I don't know. Yeah, it seemed like it seemed like it was way more in the pulp direction. Yeah. The remake was. And I looked up the guy who made the remake. Yeah. Rod Lurie, right? The guy who made the remake of it. Yeah, I think I don't know. I got the sense from his IMDb page that he's a Republican. Like I don't, I don't
Oh,
know,
okay.
but I wasn't.
I believe
I
it's
wouldn't
the
hold your breath for any, fully.
I believe it's the director of like The Contender and some of those like political films from like the early 90s. So I don't know what he's doing making like a home invasion thriller, but yes, there is a remake from 2011. I don't think we're seeing any more Straw Dog movies for at least another 20 years, but we'll see. All right, so that takes us to our final two segments, Jonah. The first one is called a Divine Double Feature, and that's where we pick a more modern film that pairs with our movie today. What's a newer movie you would pair with Straw Dog?
Okay. I have been thinking about this since I watched it. I have a couple different answers, but the one that I think I like the most would be Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Oh,
I think
great
that
movie.
would be my perfect pairing with this.
Okay.
Yeah. And in terms of there just being like kind of a hangout vibe, and then there's a home invasion. I think they sort of go together and they complemented each other in an interesting way. And I think that in terms of the feeling of the social change of the late 60s, early 70s, that's what I'm most interested in Straw Dogs, and that I think is really what Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is all about. So that would be my divine double feature.
Oh,
and
cool.
I'm sure Quentin Tarantino loves this movie.
Oh,
like I'm
yeah.
sure.
Yeah, I didn't find a quote. Usually most of these 70, 71 movies, I can find a Tarantino quote. Like, what did he think of this? I couldn't find one for Straw Dogs, but I would guess that Tarantino loves this movie. I bet you're right. Yeah. So that's a great choice. I was like, what's like a more modern kind of home invasion movie? And the one that came to mind while watching this was 2013's The Purge. Like I thought, Purge would be an interesting double feature because it deals with a lot of the same subject matter, but in such a different way. The Purge is a more kind of like looking forward kind of movie, whereas this one is very much of its day. Like I think The Purge would be kind of an interesting watch right after Straw Dog ends. I don't know about you.
Absolutely, yeah. The feeling of like you can't trust your community, like really built into it. I would say my runner-up actually was Skyfall, the 2012.
Okay. Interesting choice.
Just because again, just get us to the home invasion. You know what I mean? Like that is the climax. That's what it's all built into. That's what it's all built around. So that would be my that'd be my runner-up.
Yeah. And my runner-up, I mean, I try to pick a film I've seen. I do think, if you're interested in film history, an interesting double feature would be to look at Straw Dogs from 71 and then look at the 2011 version and see over the course of 40 years, what did they change? What did they keep the same? What's worse? What's better? It would be an interesting, it's like there was a night once I did this crazy thing where I watched Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, and then I watched Gus Van Sant's remake from 98 back to back.
Oh, wow.
And it obviously very easily shows all of the flaws in the Van Sant version, but it was an interesting experiment to look at them back to back like that, as opposed to months apart. Like you're like, whoa, okay. So I do think that would be, for someone interested in film history, would be interesting to watch these back to back. Straw Dogs 71, Straw Dogs 2011. So that would be my runner up. Very cool. All right. Our final segment is Beyond the Flick. That's where we take an actor or director or genre and dig in a little deeper. We've already talked about Dustin Hoffman. We talked about his career on the Little Big Band episode. So I thought we'd just touch on the director Sam Peckinpah briefly here. So before watching this movie, had you heard of him? Were you aware of his work at all?
So I'll tell you, I've definitely heard of Wild Bunch, and I have seen the remake of The Getaway.
Okay.
I saw that somewhat recently. It's terrible.
Oh, the Alec Baldwin, Kim Basinger one?
Yeah.
That one's pretty bad.
It's just a mess.
Yeah.
And it was so bad that it didn't make me want to watch the original. But actually, now having seen Straw Dogs, I would seek out the original.
There is a special place in my heart for cheesy 90s R-rated action movies. There's a special place in my heart for those movies. Like even the worst of them, I usually can find some entertainment value in. But yeah, The Getaway from '94 was pretty rough.
Absolutely. Yeah. I wish they were still making more movies like that, but yeah, that is not a winner for the genre. That's for sure.
Yeah. So Peckinpah, like I've seen 3 of his other films: The Getaway, Ballad of Cable Hogue, and The Wild Bunch. And I would easily recommend definitely those top 2. The Getaway, it's been probably 10 to 12 years. I can't remember. I mean, I think pretty much anything with Steve McQueen is a fun watch. So, I mean, I think that's worth a look if you like Steve McQueen. I think if you want to get a really good sense of the best that Sam Peckinpah has to offer, I think The Battle of Cable Hogue and The Wild Bunch are the 2 to seek out. I just think, and especially The Wild Bunch, that's probably his most famous film. It's very long. It's very violent. It's got a great ensemble. And I want to say that movie's at least 2.5 hours long. I mean, you have to, it's a sit like you got, but it's worthwhile. And it's just a great early example of what filmmakers could do now that we could tell stories in the R-rated realm, what we could have violence and show how it affects the characters. I feel like he did that better in The Wild Bunch than he did in Straw Dogs, like showing how violence affects people and how when someone dies, how that can affect, you know, everything that they do in the narrative from then on out. I think The Wild Bunch is a really interesting movie and certainly one of the best films of the late 60s. So my favorite Peckinpah would be The Wild Bunch. But I recommend, it's a movie very few people have probably heard of, The Ballad of Cable Hogue, starring Jason Robards. Maybe the best film I watched of 1970 that I didn't talk about on the podcast. So definitely seek that one out. It's really, really good. A much quieter film than The Wild Bunch. All right, that takes us to the end here, Jonah. Thanks so much for being my guest today on this Straw Dogs episode. Do you have anything you'd like to promote or tell our listeners where they can find you online?
Well, you can find me online on Twitter at Koslofsky Speaks. Just, look at the title of the podcast if you're worried about spelling it. I know my last name's a mouthful. I am a writer, critic, filmmaker based in Chicago. I just finished up a year-long column on the works of Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yes, that's how I found you on Twitter. That was so cool. I love that idea.
Thank you so much. Yeah. When you were talking before about having like a bunch of duds in a row and then something comes through and breaks that, I really related to that. Like that project definitely had its share of duds, including the remake of The Getaway.
Yeah, like before he gets into P.T. Anderson's world, right? There's some clunkers in there. My boyfriend's back.
Oh boy, I actually kind of like that one. That was that one. I mean, it's definitely a clunker, don't get me wrong, but
I just feel like with Philip Seymour Hoffman, no matter how good or bad the movie was, he would always bring something interesting to it. Even like at the end with the Hunger Games, and like even when he was in something that was a little bit like lesser than he was as a performer, he always brought something special.
Yeah, without a doubt. So yeah, you can find that over on The Spool. I'm also in the midst of production on a short film. It's called In You I'm Lost. That'll be all over my Twitter. So yeah, just check that out. Hopefully it'll be done by the time this podcast comes up. It should be done. There's no reason there's no one accountable for it not being done except me at that point. So yeah, and thank you so much. This was a real delight. Hopefully I've seen some more Peckinpah movies by the time this goes up. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. All right, so thanks so much for being here, Jonah. Thanks to all of you for listening. You can find us online at filmat50.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.